All right, Jamie, tier 1 for you is 2 players, Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler. Tier 1.
I think those are the first 2 players that are going to be drafted at the position. We could see Bijan Robinson maybe from an ADP standpoint leapfrog one of them, probably Eckler, but I would still keep those 2 guys at the top, especially when we're talking PPR. You know what they're capable of. You know what they have done. As you guys have alluded to, from an age standpoint, they're still right in the spot that you should be comfortable with them for at least one more season. McCaffrey more so than Eckler. Adam, despite the fact of what you brought up time and again in terms of the splits and carries for Mitchell and McCaffrey, it's not like McCaffrey was still lacking in production when Mitchell was on the field. He was still very productive, just not to the same heights that he was when Mitchell was out. So they're in great situations, great offenses, very productive, very involved in the passing game. You got to feel good about them. They are arguably in half PPR and non-PPR, the first 2 overall picks, once you get past Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. And PPR, they're right behind them as well.
Yeah, look, I don't really believe that this is going to happen again. I'm just going to throw out the numbers. In 6 games that McCaffrey played with Elijah Mitchell, he averaged 11.2 carries, 4.3 catches, and 16.7 PPR fantasy points per game. In the 5 regular season games he played without Mitchell, he averaged 18.2 carries, 4.8 catches, and 25.8 points per game. So 16.7 with Mitchell, 25.8 points per game without him. That's the difference between RB7 and RB1. So if you get RB7 with the first running back, you're going to be disappointed. But I'm not saying that's going to carry over, but I would say that's a huge difference. What are we talking here? 9 points?
I will say Heath has pointed out a few times, specifically on Twitter, that there were also some weird situations there because, one of those games was the game they blew out Arizona 38-10. One of the other games they blew out Arizona 38-13. They had the blowout playoff win against Seattle in there. I think there was a game against.
I always bring this up. Mitchell was not the garbage time running back.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Mason was. But you're right, Chris. I mean, you look at the whatever. Look, let's just say that Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler are tier 1 and leave it at that, right? I mean, I don't want to bog down the show and something that we don't.
But I do think there's some risk with both of them. Just they're also both in their late 20s. They're both on that second contract. So both Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler are at the age where if they fell off, that would be in line with what we historically expect from running backs.
Sure. Okay, tier 2 for Jamie is 3 running backs: Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, and Jonathan Taylor. And Saquon Barkley, you're keeping him here right now, Jamie?
For now. I think you look at what he should be able to accomplish if he's on the field come week 1, you should feel pretty good about it. But yeah, I think the way that I did this mostly was what I expect the guys to be, where I expect the guys to be drafted. And I think these are first round running backs, so you can make a case for Jacobs in this group as well. Tony Pollard also, but I think these are the guys that are going to go in the first round. The guys in tier 1, the guys in tier 2. We'll find out what ADP says, but these 5 I think are the first round running backs.
But not just what you think ADP will be, right? I mean, this is how you would draft too, right? You would take them.
This is how I have it ranked as well. Yes, that these are the guys that are going to be drafted in the first round, based on how I expect it to go.
Bijan, Barkley, and Taylor. Chris, any issues there?
I think Josh Jacobs should be in here, but the reports seem to indicate that there's a better chance of him actually holding out than Saquon Barkley, although I think there's a chance for both of them. It's tough with the holdouts just because none of them really have any leverage if they hold out. The changes to the CBA over the last couple of years have really limited what you can actually accomplish with a holdout. So it's how much do these guys want to take a stand that may not actually lead to anything. But based on what he did last season and what I expect his role to be in the offense, especially Josh McDaniels' offense has over the course of about 20 years been incredibly valuable for running backs. It's been top 12, 15 times out of 20 years or something in terms of total running back points. So I do think if Josh Jacobs is there, he's going to play a significant role and be, close to as good as he was last year.
By the way, Chris is talking about holding out regular season games for Barkley and Jacobs. They will certainly hold out in training camp. They're not under contract, so they won't be fined for that, but they would be fined if they hold out regular season games. All right, so we'll talk about Josh Jacobs. Is he in tier 3? We'll find out after a quick break on Fantasy Football Today. We've gotten through 2 tiers so far. Tier 1 is McCaffrey and Eckler. Tier 2 is Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, and Jonathan Taylor. And those are the 5 running backs most likely to be drafted in the first round. Tier 3 for Jamie does have Josh Jacobs in it. Chris said that he would put Jacobs in Tier 2, assuming there's no holdout. But Tier 3 for Jamie is Pollard, Jacobs, Chubb, and Henry. Pollard, Jacobs, Chubb, and Henry. So what separates, Jamie, Pollard, Jacobs, Chubb, and Henry from Bijan, Barkley, and Taylor? Why are they lower?
Again, the way I was looking at it was where I expect these guys to be drafted, where I would draft them. So Pollard for me toes the line. Same with Josh Jacobs in terms of being first round running backs. So they're early in round 2. I think they're going to be, again, very successful players if they continue to do what Pollard showed last year, building off that and what we looked at when the games that Ezekiel Elliott was out, and then Jacobs, hopefully still being that guy. I'm just concerned really for the most part, this Raiders offense as a whole with the quarterback change going to Jimmy Garoppolo. Chubb and Henry, you know what the flaws are, the lack of work in the passing game, but they're going to be 2 of the best running backs if they stay healthy. I mentioned this yesterday with DeAndre Hopkins. I'm still have the same concerns about, Henry at 29 years old and all the wear and tear on his body behind that offensive line. So I'm a little bit, out on him. But again, I think if ADP holds from what NFC ADP is, if you're getting him at the back end of round 2, it's hard to overlook that. But I think these are second round running backs that you should feel very confident in. If you go wide receiver in the first round, you get one of these guys in the second round, you should feel pretty good about that.
Would you guys like to hear a fun fact about Tony Pollard?
Yeah,
sure.
Last season, 13 running backs scored at least 10 touchdowns. Among those 13 running backs, Ezekiel Elliott had the shortest average touchdown length, and Tony Pollard had the longest average touchdown length. His average touchdown was 25 yards. Now, that's awesome, right? He's the clear lead back in a situation that created 20-plus running back touchdowns. The only thing is, are they going to bring in someone? Is it Ezekiel Elliott comes back? Do they bring in another? That's the only thing with Tony Pollard is that, one, I would feel a little better about him if he had been able to finish out last season as a high volume back for the first time and not get hurt. That's just it's an unknown for me, but also just if they don't bring in another running back, either Malik Davis is going to have 9 touchdowns unexpectedly, or Tony Pollard's just going to have an absolutely massive season. I have some concerns about how many points the Cowboys offense is going to score with the move from Kellen Moore to Mike McCarthy. But as things stand, if you're just projecting the Cowboys offense as they are currently constructed, it's hard for Tony Pollard not to be a top 5 running back.
I think one thing that you can look at from the rushing touchdown scenario is they'll probably throw the ball a little bit more in the red zone. At least that's what Mike McCarthy sort of indicated. Obviously, Tony Pollard's got a chance to take a lot of those 12 short yardage touchdowns. But it could also be, Deuce Vaughn. It could be Ronald Jones. It could be one of those other guys that are there. It could be a group. We'll find out. But I don't think they're done with their backfield. I think, you could connect the dots that Zeke might come back just because at this point, if they haven't brought somebody else in, either they really love that group or they just have said, all right, Zeke, if you want to go look for something else, go look for something else. Here's the deal that's on the table for you. It's probably peanuts. And, he's mulling that decision. But I do think that, you look at it. And the one thing about it is, you touched on this briefly, Chris, in terms of the injury. If it was more soft tissue, I'd be much more concerned. The fact that he broke his leg, to me, that's more fluky than it is.
Sure,
he couldn't handle the workload. I don't think his body broke down. It's just he got tackled awkwardly.
Yeah, Pollard did kind of falter down the stretch. He was not nearly as efficient, and I don't know if that's a workload thing or not, but Chris, you talk about the Patriots or the Josh McDaniels offense being so good for running backs. I mean, the Cowboys have got to be up there in terms of running points.
In Kellen Moore's years, absolutely 18th, 6th, and 3rd in the last 3 years in terms of total PPR points for their running backs. That's all running backs on the roster. The concern there is Green Bay's offense under Mike McCarthy. They ranked 20th in his time as the head coach in RB PPR points. Now that's, different offenses. Aaron Rodgers played at a very, very slow pace and continued to after Mike McCarthy, but that's a bit of a concern. I did a Twitter thread earlier in the offseason comparing Josh Jacobs and Tony Pollard, and the Josh McDaniels offense has just been so much better than the Mike McCarthy offenses in terms of running back production over the course of we're talking almost 20 years for both of them. So it's a pretty stark edge.
Interesting. All right. So one more thing here, just looking at this group. If we're saying why is tier 3 of Pollard, Jacobs, Chubb, and Henry behind tier 2 of Bijan, Barkley, and Taylor? Okay, Pollard, it's maybe workload concerns. We've never seen it from him before. They might bring in another running back. Jacobs has a holdout right now, and Jamie's concerned about the overall offense. Derrick Henry, we know what the issues are with Derrick Henry. Terrible offensive line, perhaps, and he's going to be 30 years old in January, so he's pretty old for a guy that we would expect to be a great running back. But why Nick Chubb? Why isn't Nick Chubb in tier 2, Jamie?
I love Nick Chubb. I think, look, you can make the case that all these guys are tier 2. Just make it a bigger group. I was just trying to separate it so we weren't having all these guys lumped together. So these are all, they're within, if I was doing projections, they'd all be within, a half a point of each other. That's how close they are and should be, considered. Because, again, if you tell me Nick Chubb gets more involvement, he's going to compete to be the best running back in fantasy. He has that potential if his role in the passing game is better. If Henry stays healthy, I'm going to look foolish for having him ranked too low again. Pollard with the expected leap, Jacobs with what he does in this offense, if it is still successful. That offensive line proved to be much better than anybody expected last year. So, we're just nitpicking here. So, yes, Nick Chubb's, he's been one of my favorite targets in round 2. I love going receiver Nick Chubb, and then a hero RB build, just because I think it's easy to do, and he's going to, hopefully have that one final big season, because again, he is approaching that age where you get a little bit worried about it. But if there is no Kareem Hunt or nobody else of significance brought in, it's Jerome Ford as the top backup, you got to be thrilled about having Nick Chubb on your fantasy team.